This session is not intended to regurgitate 3 days of discussion last week. So you all heard whatever you chose to listen to. And there have been a lot of discussions subsequently about those discussions. So I think the strategy here is a little bit different. You've heard me say, or some of you have probably heard me say, that SCI-Arc is less about the pedagogy of the school, methods, allegiances, affiliations, ways of doing things. And I think much more about the creation, both in terms of faculty members and certainly in terms of students, of people who might make the pedagogy in the future. And so I think the question to you, to all of you, to the panel, the 5 young architects, is what are we doing? What are we making? What does the work have to say about the students in an idiosyncratic sense? What does the work have to say about the prospects in a pedagogical way? Where's the school going? Why is it going there? Should it be going there? Where else might it go? I don't think there's a single answer to any of that. But I think those are the kinds of questions that we need to talk about. And it's important, I think everyone in this room, the discussion pertains to everyone in this room, at least every student in the room. For the obvious reasons, you're either in the room and you've done a thesis, or you at some point will be in the room or in the discussion and will do a thesis, whether you're an undergraduate or whether you're a graduate. So in a conceptual way, this work, ideas, conceptual strategies, representational issues, content, all of that, either belongs to you currently or it'll belong to you sometime in the near future. So in that sense, I think it's extremely important as a prognosis of what might in the near future belong to you in terms of how you would do your work and prioritize the content of your work and so on and so on. I think there's another point which is of particular interest to me when I look at this work in terms of its assets and in terms of its liabilities. Essentially, the projects are double projects in a way. It's not so much, I'm not sure there's an exception to that in this room, it's not so much a particular project on a particular site in a particular city with a particular program and a particular solution that pertains to all those particulars. There's almost none of that, actually. The discussion really, it seems to me, is about what architecture is about, what a project is about, and how that manifests itself in a particular project. In other words, each project is about priorities, I think, in architecture as they manifest themselves in a particular example of that. And I think it's important to understand that. I think the students have taken, and I think this has very much to do with the way Leigh and Jeff and Bernard and advisors have directed this and guided this, that it is never a project unto itself. I didn't say it couldn't be, and it didn't say it shouldn't be, but in almost every case the discussion is, in a sense, what's architecture? What can buildings do? What can they give? What can they take? What obligations does architecture have in a conceptual sense as manifest in a particular sense? I think I would argue that in many cases the particulars get lost, actually. So that if there's a conceptual strategy or a point of view, about what architecture should be, I think I can say safely that many of the projects begin and end at that point. Meaning there's relatively little concern, for instance, about will it fall down or stand up? Does anybody care? Is it inhabited, actually? Meaning, is it operational in a conventional sense? Does anybody care? So there are issues that are more, as were referred to in the jury, more prosaic kinds of questions. And SCI-Arc seems to have, I think, relatively little patience with prosaic questions. And ultimately, there is probably a discussion to be had about the interrelationship between more prosaic concerns and more complex, what is the responsibility of architecture concerns. So this is a brief synopsis, and it's something for all of you to consider as you move toward the projects you'll do that we'll be discussing in the next few years. I think what we have in the room, correct me if I'm wrong, but what we have in the room there were 5 projects that at the graduation you remember that were acknowledged as unique and special efforts. And I think we had another 5, 10 in the room? 10 in the room in total. So that I think from the vantage point, and keep in mind, we try to do this in a reasonably saintly way. The vantage point is, I'm not going to be able to name everyone, but the jurors that are outsiders, not the jurors that belong to SCI-Arc, who vote on the projects. So by and large, what you're looking at on the wall is a consensus, to the extent there is a consensus, of opinion of the jurors that we invited to the school. And I think it's a useful consensus when you look at from where these people come, what they represent in professional terms. I'm talking about the jurors. I think the juries have gotten better. The jurors have gotten better. The contentiousness seems to me much less to do with personality or persona and much more to do with differing perspectives of what architecture should be. So by and large, at least in the discussions that I participated in, I thought they were quite extraordinary. And of course, there seems to have been, in the last week or so, a particular focus on Patrick's, not only participation in juries, which seemed to be much more pragmatic, followed by his performance last Monday night, which represented something very different in theological terms, which is something I think he's obligating us to deal with, and I think we're pleased to deal with. Anyway, what we want to do is talk to the students, and give you an opportunity also to comment, to acknowledge very unusual efforts in terms of content, energy, fortitude, perseverance, patience, and so on and so on. So this probably goes without saying, so I'm not sure we have to continue in laudatory terms just to speak about those things, but to try instead to speak in a more critical way about the content of the work. I don't know, Wendy is correct me if I got it wrong, but the first project going clockwise, the first project that we're going to, I'm just going to give them names because I don't know what to call them, but this is the LA Times, Estee Lauder, Cosmetics. This is the first project. The second project is the Haunted House, Frankenstein horror project, just behind Ming. The third project, I think we swing over to the right, is what I think I refer to in the jury as the C.S. Lewis project, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is a toy project or a fairy tale is the Daedalus Minotaur Labyrinth project. And finally, the one over my right shoulder. I'm by and large using terminology more or less that belongs to the architect, which may also be a question in terms of nomenclature, which then sometimes leads jurors and everyone else off in directions that are not necessarily productive. But anyway, Dionysus Apollo project, which is the drawing project that Joshua produced. And there is a question which interests me, and I'd like to address it to each of the architects. And it has to do with work which purports to represent new perspectives, new strategies, new points of view, novel ideas, and so on. And all of them except Cosmetics, Estee Lauder, belong to either philosophical, historical, literary, artistic movements that are somewhat distant in time from Dionysus Apollo, Labyrinth, which has quite a long history. Whether this is the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that nomenclature probably belongs to me, but it is a kind of fairy tale. The Horror Project, which has quite a long history, I think, in literature and in film. The question is why the associations backwards and forwards in time? What does that give us? How does that help us? Why, in projects that purport to move the discussion forward, are there associations made with historical movements in art and literature that belong to bygone eras? So maybe we can start with that.
Questions on history, I guess? Reference on
Dionysus, Apollo, those are pretty old guys.
Right. Well, I mean, essentially I was just using them as frame of reference of what I was trying to accomplish with those poems. Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, drunkenness, and then Apollo, rationality. So I was trying to pretty much make cake and have it of drunkenness. Why we reference that? I think it's just kind of like an academic standby that just always referencing like some sort of abstract reference. So that's my response to that.
Mine goes in the sense of utilizing the horror genre, both from literary to cinema. Just part of the aspects of the films dealing with, for instance, Poltergeist, Frankenstein, Psycho, most recently the Paranormal Activity. One of these ideas being something that is slowly revealed or never particularly revealed at all. But I think strangely I mostly relate with Frankenstein a lot. And this idea of this taking over the suburban environment, seen as the demon and the monster at first, which slowly, I feel Frankenstein had a sort of humanity to it, which what I felt during the slow exposure of this project kind of slowly revealed the small piece of humanity that were built to Frankenstein, as opposed to people coming and picketing and burning my project down. Slowly come to kind of realize a certain domesticity that was applied to it. So.
My project was really from the beginning a fairy tale, and I think it's lived that reputation through and through. It borrowed from the fact that the very basic idea of what I think architects do when they create a sort of world for us, and whatever is made to be practical or permanent. And that's another thing, that I don't think anything is permanent. I think everything is impermanent, as ideas go. I borrowed from the fairy tale genre to speak my vision of, and show you guys my vision of an architectural world that could be flying between the fine line between reality and the fantasy. And there is a certain naive outlook throughout my thesis, and I think there is novelty in that still to be found in that, to just bring it down to a childlike quality that I think all architects, whether you're very pragmatic or very out there, that it lies in all of us, this childlike quality. I just wanted to bring that to the forefront through and through. And whether the question is always, is this architecture or is it art? I got that question, and it was a challenge for me to answer that throughout the course of the thesis, the thesis semester. And in the end, if space is used in a certain way, I think it takes time for a certain idea to be made normal, or to see it as the normalcy of what we view the world as. And that was just my take on it.
So Labyrinth came about, I guess, my interest in high complexity with simple geometries, and that essentially is the Labyrinth. So the Labyrinth actually was not of particular interest because of its history, but rather because of its spatial implications. So the way one moves through it, and then also perspectives of the Labyrinth. So one condition that comes out of the project is a new way to view the Labyrinth. So traditionally you view it from a plan, or once you're in the Labyrinth and you're fully involved in it. But this project, through the construction of it, there's an open floor plate where you can look either down and get oblique angles through the Labyrinth below, and then the Labyrinth above. So it's really, I actually tried to negate the history a lot through the project and focus more on its spatial implications, which essentially is the high complexity with simple geometry.
I'm not sure what you mean by my project on history.
Well, I think there's probably an aptitude, if you do enough panel discussions, for someone who asks you a question and you answer what you already intended to answer anyway and forget about the question. So this happens fairly consistently, and nobody should be so astonished by that. But I think the question really had to do with the longevity of the source material. Just the juxtaposition, which doesn't apply to you, really. I mean, it might, but it's the cosmetic issue, which raises very different questions. I think it really applied to the first 4 architects who didn't answer the question. But it's just quizzical or of interest to me that the sources for what purport to be new ideas belong to a very particular point in time in history. Because it seemed to me, and I don't think anybody really did this, if you take like the last architect and the question of Labyrinth, and there are any number of labyrinths, and the famous Labyrinth and the Minotaur and Thesis and Daedalus and all of that. And it seems to me if you wanted to use that issue, then its origins are actually of some interest. It's not by the way. What's a labyrinth? What does it mean, and what did it mean historically? How is that historic antecedent relevant in this case? Because in that particular project, it seemed to me, and I wasn't in that discussion, but the point of the labyrinth, and the reason, I think it was Thesis, the reason they ran a string in there is because you can't find your way out. So the conception of labyrinth as an idea looking from Jupiter and being in it and and being lost in it and being confused by it. So you don't know where you are. And that's how come nobody can get in, and that's how come the Minotaur can't get out. That's why I did it that way. And it seemed to me that issue, so the experience, that's why I said a minute ago, does it actually make any difference whether anybody's in this project? Because the experience of a labyrinth is not a philosophical conception about the interrelationship between simple geometry, which makes complex space somehow. So that could be a piece of a topic. It just seems to me, if that's the origin of an idea, so somebody could say, why is that the origin of an idea? Why couldn't it be simple geometry making simple space, or complex geometry making complex space, or complex geometry, it's like an IQ examination. Why should I pick one instead of the other? Oh, because it's a labyrinth. What's a labyrinth? And it seemed to me in the process that the meaning of labyrinth as an experience, again, why does it matter that anyone else actually goes into this thing? And I think for all of us, this is part of the perspective. Are the buildings inhabited? Does it make any difference? So if it doesn't make any difference, somebody should say so. Because again, it seems like in your case it's very conceptual, but it's conceptual without associating the new definition with the old definition. And again, as I said initially, I think it seems to be more about architecture fundamentally as a reflection of what architecture is about. That's really the topic.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. It's definitely meant, I was thinking about the inhabitant in the project, and the experience one goes through, inside the building was really important. So there's these alternating floor plates, and one floor plate is the labyrinth, which holds all the stats. And the inhabitant would be encased by this labyrinth, right? And then so you're involved in it, and then once you get out, you have these oblique perspectives of it. So it's the difference of being in this confined space, right? And then you release from it above or below, and then you can see even oblique angle.
I get it conceptually. I think if you look at that project, it's an enormously powerful conceptual idea and ditto as an aesthetic idea. But you have to remember one thing. It's a library, okay? So this must be Kafka's library, because in a conventional, whatever a library is, there's an interesting discussion now whether the idea of library is already an antique in terms of the issues of contemporary issues that have to do with retrieving information and how you do it. So what's digitized and what remains as a book and all of that, which one would think, if you took on a problem of library, would be issues like, what's a contemporary library with all of that information retrieval stuff? It seems to me to create a venue which is entirely aesthetic, better you take away the label library. So this is an event pavilion in a way, and it has its own power or its own mystique, but it seems to have relatively, you don't get lost in a library. You might get lost in the content, or if you do, and that's the objective, then we should understand this is a new library, and the objective of the library is to get lost in the stats.
Well, I think that's definitely part of it. So, I think one of the greatest things about going to the library, and the reason why I believe that everything shouldn't be electronic, is getting lost and losing track of time. And you look for something on the shelves, but yet you encounter 20 other books that you wouldn't have found otherwise. So that is part of it.
Yeah, but this, in terms of issues of freedom, if it's a choice to hang out in a library, and encounter books. It's one thing, you gotta get a book and get back somewhere and write something, or some teacher chasing you, and the paper is due. And you don't wanna get lost in it, you get in, you wanna get out. So again, in terms of conventional, and I said prosaic issue, did you say that, what you just said, when you presented the project?
No.
That the strategy was for the user of the library to get lost in the steps?
No, because I mean, that was a byproduct and something I was always thinking of, but there were really three main points that came out of the construction of this and the design of this. So, I mean, it was basically this new perspective of the labyrinth and this on-off condition of labyrinth, no labyrinth, labyrinth, no labyrinth in plan and in section. So, and then there, and that goes down, that traces back to the labyrinth itself, right? So labyrinth is always crochet, non-crochet, crochet, and then you scale out in the project and you have labyrinth, mass in the middle, and then open floor plate, no labyrinth, and then facades.
We're not really in a position to look at that. I think there's not any question about the power of the graphic idea and the spatial idea. I think the question that I'm raising for you, which is an open question, slightly facetiously, my argument is that the argument of the project is denser and intenser if it includes other issues rather than whatever the power of actually simplifying the operational content of the project. And I think to some extent that project may get its results and the power of the piece by ignoring a lot of issues that belong to buildings in a particular way. And that's why I said, is it an idea with general applicability, but no specific applicability? Is it a labyrinth in the sense that you look at it as an elevation or as a plan or as a section, but you actually get lost in it as somebody who uses it, and therefore the real reading of the building in an experiential sense is very different than a reading of the building in a representational sense. Okay, let me just, because Naureen didn't get a chance. Her project, I think, is in a very different category, and I think raises topically a question that has been, in a number of ways, I think some of Elena's students have dealt with this in one form or another, but questions of fashion and related subject matter as they connect to design content of buildings or don't. So in terms of conceptually justifying why should we believe that the Los Angeles Times, such as it is at the moment, to say that the Los Angeles Times advances as a function of 5 versions of itself made up, so this would be your word or something like that, made up in 5 different ways, particularly because I think in the text, when we reviewed your project, the text of the project actually refers to the language of the project as superfluous. So you're telling us it's superficial. And so how would that connect to a contemporary definition of what should architecture be?
I think more than looking at a direct function of envelopes and building form, this project kind of looks at how do you take something that's so excessive and just continue to layer it onto itself so much to see if it can become something. So it is superfluous, but at the same time, through that process of excessiveness, it seeks to find something else. It seeks to find a depth that is initiated from thinking about what is makeup, what happens when you layer one thing on top of another and you can remove it, and it's meant to cover flaws and it's meant to amplify what do those things really mean to a building, and how can they not just change the surface, but change the overall form of it?
So, and the answer is,
I
I
mean,
mean, what do we know now that we didn't know before? I mean, when you manipulate pieces, there's no in how do you build it conceptually? There's no technical, except for one scheme, there's very little technical mechanism or association with changes in makeup, with changes in substance, meaning what do you have to do to the building to get the result? I mean, in terms of the last one, what do you have to do to the building to get the result? What does it do to the operational content of the building? What does it do to the building on the street? What does it do to the building on the city? All of those kinds of prosaic questions. And it seems to me you could do this project. There's nothing in this project, however much Domus loves it, there's nothing in the project that actually is illustrative of its operational content, which is again why I ask you, does it matter whether it's inhabited or not?
in this
Not in a theoretical sense, but did you pay any attention to that?
In the beginning, attention was paid to it, and like the initial stage of the project changed very much from the very end. The first stance was, this is the LA Times building, what does it mean to Los Angeles? How can these surface techniques change the way that the endangered newspaper is going to be read? And then very quickly, the focus turned into just focusing on technique. What does the cosmetic mean in architecture?
But wait a minute, I mean, I think that this is part of the discussion. What do you mean by technique? I mean, in other words, if they're looking for you because if you robbed the bank, the question is, do you change the color, or do you have reconstructive surgery, in which case they can't find you no matter what? In other words, what are you operating on, and how do you do it? And it seems to me, in order to address that, you would have to address a number of other questions which are not part of the discourse. You said it belongs to the LA Times, but the fact that it belongs to the LA Times is again superfluous. Nobody cares, nor does it really matter where it is in the city. If you thought the associations of the building with other buildings were an issue, or show us what the building is now in a technical sense, so we understand what is the mechanism that we're doing that. And we see that in the Frankenstein project. One piece eats the other piece. One piece is there, another piece arrives, the first piece dissipates and presumably dissolves. You don't see that sequence. You see a little bit of the film. You don't see that sequence, and you have no idea how it happens, or whether you could stop it. It just occurs simultaneously, and then one enlarges and the other dissipates. And I think the two projects have similar issues. How does it happen? It doesn't matter. And then I think we have to say, frankly, that's not important, how it takes place. I mean, does it come out of the ground like Jack's beanstalk? I mean, is it a technical mechanism? Where does it come from? Are there 5 more of these? Are there 10 more of these?
I mean, there potentially could be. First, I'll answer the question about where they come from. So the primary idea is that for the 5, they're temporary. They are parallel to the idea of makeup in the sense that it's something that's not permanent and it's something that can be changed. And how can you take certain techniques and do that to a building? On the building, nothing is actually removed from it. Nothing is spliced, nothing is caved in. Everything is just added on. So taking makeup techniques and printing techniques is the main idea in how the 5 techniques were produced.
Do you want to pick that up in terms of the Frankenstein discussion? I mean, the question is really, is there a chronology to the process? This goes back to the project of the haunted house, which seems to originate as one building, which has a more recognizable form as a house, although there's not really a discussion of what might constitute a house, whether it's a house at all, how it's lived in, any of that. And then that is subsequently eroded and ultimately, I guess, replaced by something different. But there's no process for that.
I would say there's, as it progressed, originally, I actually worked out how the house was going to work with people definitely in mind taking it over. Specifically, it kind of ended up evolving to this multi-family dwelling on taking the original house. And as this, I remember you talking about it before, I've talked about it with Renan previously as kind of this remodel gone wild. This object which starts, which I never felt needed to have an answer as far as where it originated from, where it came from, why it came. But definitely in the beginning there was always plans for this thing to be inhabited.
Let me interrupt you. I'm sorry, but yeah, I guess there's a question for all of us, which is what makes a project like this credible in a conceptual way, credible conceptually as a project? And if there's a question of the origin of the adversary, the thesis and the antithesis, and your answer is it didn't matter, or your answer is it wasn't relevant, or your answer is you didn't care. So then the question is, because in a conceptual way, the question is not an unfair question. So then how, in what frame of reference do you find the project a credible project if it omits a question which seems to be, or could be, an essential question? What makes that a credible solution conceptually if it neglects those issues of what was there, what comes, and how the two interact in a procedural way?
I think what mattered is more the interaction between the two. I suppose what I was trying to say is, as far as where this was birthed, if it came from Krypton or wherever else it came from, I mean, that wasn't the issue for me, but I mean, definitely the issue was the interaction between the two, which was, this is a project that takes place not in any particular area of Detroit, but using Detroit as this fallout city where there's just complete degradation and death of the entire architectural infrastructure that's taking place in this moment. And this as a piece of, in all honesty, at the end of the day, a piece of rejuvenation, of it slowly taking over what, I don't remember who it was on my review, but spoke to it as the house that you went to visit grandmother at, and grandma, and there's this comfortability with it, which I countered, and I can see the Victorian house as this area of comfort, and more of what Cronenberg dealt with his earlier films is this visceral takeover of the body, like this fear that something from within takes over and tears away at your being without any, I suppose, idea or indication of what it may become. It could become innocuous. It could be the demon that takes over the host, but perhaps taking over the demon really isn't that bad in the first place. Maybe it's just bad for the host who gets taken over. But I felt the idea interesting of then, through occupation, through the people taking over the demon itself, which took over the host and destroyed it, as a way to go through the process myself. But I think that's what I meant more so when I said it didn't necessarily matter where it came from. It was just particularly the origin of the organism itself, but I think it does matter in relation to the project or the ideas.
I should say, when you get a chance, I don't know if it's running now, I can't see it, but the film that was made for this project by this architect is a spectacular piece of film work, extraordinary. So you got to take a look at that. For me, it was really about the film or that medium, which suggests a very different frame of reference than the model and the building. And I think we talk about Kafka's story, which is less histrionics, but in Kafka's story, the guy wakes up in the morning, you call him on the story, wakes up in the morning and looks down and he's turning into a cockroach. And it's just another day, the metamorphosis is just another day at the beach. And what's terrifying about that story is how utterly normal it is. Normal meaning it's just another day. This project is a little bit different than that. It's not hysterical. Hysterical would probably be the wrong word, but it's a very different conception of horror. If it's not dramatic, it's melodramatic, I think. But now we're talking about something which, I mean, your description of it sounded more like a disease, which is the way disease works, presumably. I mean, you're one thing, and it grabs you, and it won't let go, and it turns you into something else. And I think this is somewhere between a case for a psychotherapist or a film. And I guess the question that we're asking is what brings it back to, what is it responsible as it relates to more conventional ideas about building and architecture? Because ultimately there's a building, or there are two buildings. That's what the model tells us. Or is it really a study, an essay in film and art and transformation? And that's the subject. Because maybe part of the problem is we get confused because the discussion confuses us. Then somebody says, how do you do it, and how do you hold it up, and how do we know this is going to happen? If you actually look at the project, there are pieces connected to pieces that can't work that way in a literal sense. But if you're dreaming, or you're on the couch talking to somebody or other, then the plausibility quotient is different. And I think that's what I'm after is what makes that a plausible conception or a plausible idea about how to do architecture. I mean, it isn't is also a possible answer. It's about something else.
I guess, I mean, I understand what you're saying about the confusion and how the dialogue progresses throughout. Just because in the beginning it was this element where I was very much considering how this could function as a multifamily dwelling, how this could function architecturally. And then in all honesty, I feel the elements of transformation, metamorphosis, and order begin to slowly take over that process. So I would say in the end, I think that's where more of what I was saying dwells. Is it began as this process of, I mean, in all honesty, like utter banality, like how does a house work, looking at multiple cases, etc., and then completely having this process evolve and take over as it was more of the idea of transformation, the slow revelation and metamorphosis from one aspect of horror into possibly a different aspect of beauty, or whatever it became in the end.
What I think is useful to people going forward is you can start to see however differently these projects appear, useful connections. I mean, if we go to the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is also, I mean, for all its differences with the haunted house, is also a project in a way that doesn't have any conventional allegiance to building, or what are the toys made of, or how do they move, or any of that, or for that matter, how they move through a marketplace where, as far as I know, there aren't any people anyway, very few. It's a downtown market, it's certainly not loaded with children. But in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's a closet door. This is C.S. Lewis. There's a closet door, and the children go out the door of the closet, and only the children can go out that door. And you go out that door, and you go into a world which only belongs to them and never to the adults, which sounds pretty good, actually. And in some ways, your project, the two projects, seem to share qualities which are either dreamlike or fantasy-like, in which case it's hard to call you to account in a more conventional architectural sense. Then the question is, to what is it responsible, or how do you know you got it right? Because it'll probably fall down. And as inhabitation goes, it probably is dubious. So how do we know we got it right?
We don't.
Well, how do we turn it around? How do you, there's a we and a you.
With me, I don't know if I got it right.
You don't?
No, I don't. Honestly, within the world that I created, and this imagination, this sort of fairy tale that
You accept that definition?
yes, I do. From the beginning, it was always the nightmares and fairy tales. It was having to do with this line between emergent reality and what over time can this become reality to us as adults who have a tradition, an idea of what serious architecture should be, and the practical, and whatever it is being built is defined as architecture. And this had to leave that kind of, those practical questions alone for a second in order to start from ground zero in my world. In terms of what are these characters doing, it was always about the arrangement of them, and what became really important for me in this narrative was also creating a historical background for each character. And that's something I never shared with the audience. It was something that I kept to myself, even during the presentation. But
We knew that.
yeah. And the thing is, honestly, I don't know if this is correct in terms of the question that you asked, but it is my way of saying that this can be something that we see as reality and not as the fantasy. And the reason why it was kept in this fairy tale then is because it is a fairy tale. As we know it within this time frame and what we've learned that architecture is. And it dealt with the personalities of the creators that created each character rather than the program itself. So,
But in a way, it has to do with, I think this is getting to something that might be useful. A lot of the work, maybe all of the work in the room, is incredibly personal or private. And I had a feeling, at least in some of the discussions, maybe Joshua's was the most extreme, that after sitting there for 45 minutes, and I know that was represented as a good discussion, that you had a feeling you never really touched the meaning of the project as the designer understood the meaning of the project. And I think this raises a very different question in terms of extreme or very personal points of view that have to do with dream states or fantasies or fairy tales or horror stories or haunted houses, all of that, which belongs to a very particular narrative spun out by the architect, which is almost immune, ipso facto immune to criticism, because it belongs, and I think, let me back up. When we talk about buildings, which is a clumsy process for critics and for teachers, and maybe there's an argument that in the end, a lot of this can't be taught. Maybe we're talking around subjects. So we're trying to find issues in common, and we can say, you see this, it should be like that. That's it. So, for instance, if Florencia is your advisor, So she looked at your project and she said, this should be blue, and it should be over here. And you say, what do you say? That's your dream. This is my dream. It's red and it's over here. You know? And you get to a point in a way where it's almost impossible to discuss it. And I think the discussion presumes that there's enough content, however different we all are, the discussion presumes that there's enough content we hold in common actually to have a real discussion. And I think part of the difficulty now is that where we're going makes it's not so much you can't get Tom or Frank or Schumacher or Marcelo or Nan, et cetera, to yak about something. That's easy. We just wind these people up and they go. So this we know. And the discussions are of some interest. This is also true. But to the extent that they touch the content of the project, or move the content of the project, or assist the student, and by the way, it probably works two ways, whether the student can assist the audience, or whether the game is to obfuscate, meaning obscure some of the discussion. So I think this happens too. I'm not saying it's all one or it's all the other, but I think what I found in these projects in particular is a hugely personal vantage point. And there's an audience for that. There's absolutely an audience for that. So whatever the guy's name, the Domus guy comes, and he makes a publication, and he says, okay, the greatest ever, without much critical content, without much discourse, and he sticks it in a magazine, and it has, in a way, credence. So I think we're less interested in that aspect of the game, and more in trying, if we can, to find enough in common so we can talk about this and move the content of the project. Joshua's project, I think, was the drawing discussion, which raises lots of questions, including what does it mean now to draw in a way very different than architecture has historically been presented. And what struck me, and I don't think he found, I think he gave us back something which we already knew about. And notwithstanding its form is nominally different, and I think you could argue actually it's very conservative, and in a way very predictable, given the genre, that it's actually giving us drawings that we already know, notwithstanding the jury had a hard time reading them for obvious reasons. But I think what you said at one point was the difference in making drawings now is that as you draw very complex stuff, all of you, very complex stuff, you editorialize, you edit the drawing. So the drawing you give us is actually thousands of drawings. And what's fascinating, when I thought about it, I thought actually what he should have done, so we give him a chance to respond to this, is not to present that, but actually to sit in front of the jury and draw. And as he's drawing, revise the drawing as he goes, making decisions and trying to understand for what reasons, what strategic reasons, and conceptual reasons he would modify the drawings. And it seems to me this actually gives a different vantage point on what it means to draw in a very traditional way for 1,000 years, as opposed to a more contemporaneous way. Yes? No?
The intention was to create drawings that were unconventional, and they all had to start somewhere, and so the initial start was a conventional drawing, but the techniques that were used to create that were something I could never, ever do by hand. So they're completely digital in that fact. But they've also been manipulated in other ways that makes it unconventional. And
But isn't it really about editing? Isn't the process utterly different in that sense? And the mechanism you're using makes it so. That's the difference, really. That the drawing is never the drawing is 1,000 drawings.
right.
You know? That's a big issue. I think that's why we've said on a number of occasions, and I think you could learn a hell of a lot more about these projects if you saw them, for instance, if you saw the haunted house in 20 stages, and you could see, if nothing else, even if you didn't account for the origin of the disease, but you could see it in steps, and you could actually understand the evolution of the idea a little bit more as a process. When you get an idea of the irresolution and the difficulties, the struggles in finally arriving at a conclusion, which is very different than only seeing the conclusion, because that's not how the project was studied, and that's not how the project was learned about. And particularly now with very different tools that allow editing in a way that it was inconceivable 20 years ago. So it seemed to me this is really very much an issue for what is the conceptual difference in drawing and looking for a way to illustrate it.
Well, I mean, our techniques are completely different from the last 30 years. And so that's what this is trying to represent. We're trying to communicate this. And there was definitely the generational discussion, review, my review. And I only had like 2 people under like 40 that review. The people that were under 40 got it. I think everybody above that did. And it's because our generation is comfortable in modeling the digital space. And therefore, why do we need drawing? Because of it. If we're gonna build, we got robots back there that can build, so we're gonna need construction documents. And so I was looking for more of a way to communicate as peers, as an architect and architect, and in my intent and through the way that I've constructed the project itself.
This raises another question. I mean, I have to say, and some of you have heard me say this before. I think either the generational argument, which is used in some cases, if you don't understand it, it's too loud, you're too old, that kind of stuff. And I think this comes down to a kind of very difficult, politically correct argument, which has to do with, can somebody who's white understand somebody who's black, somebody who's old understand somebody who's young. And ultimately, if you take it to an extreme, of course, nobody can understand anybody, which I think was the story of the Tower of Babel. And I hope we're not heading for that. I think actually it's not so much, it may be different generations know different things, but there are also exceptions to that. And so I would be a little bit careful of categorizing an audience which is either sympathetic or unsympathetic, because ipso facto sympathetic or unsympathetic because of their age. So I think this is better to deal with the content of the discussion. And there are a lot of examples of that in our own lives in terms of particular kinds of expertise. I mean, a general goes to a war zone in Iraq and comes back and says, you guys don't know what it means to be a general. Only generals know what it means to be a general. The cavalry is doing this, and the infantry is doing that, and the river is this, and the mountain is this. Therefore, I know, listen to me, I'm an expert. So I think what we try to do here is to break that down and assume that each person in her own way, in his own way, has the intellectual capacity to penetrate these issues and to come with a position which belongs to you. So this is at least an ideal. So we don't defer to generational arguments or to expert arguments. Okay, here it is. to air up or to grow apple or make it stand up. You're the expert. Big mistake. So what we're interested in doing is connecting the content of buildings at all levels to the authors of those buildings who are the architects in the room. One other question, I think this may be useful to you in a personal way, would be to get each of the architects who volunteered to do this discussion to comment a little bit on the process or the jury and in terms of what was good about it, what was bad about it, what was helpful to you, and what might be helpful to people who are coming after you. Okay, go ahead. If you like to comment on it.
In terms of the jury, the day of the presentation, everything.
Closer to.
Sorry. I think it's really important to just, more than thinking about the discussion that's going to be coming out of the review, is to produce the best work that you possibly can, and to spend the time that is allotted, because thesis prep is time, to kind of subtract things, everything that's outside of you, and just zoom in on what your interests are. I thought about my statement, I thought about what I was going to say. I tried to predict the outcome of the review, and it was completely different from what I expected. There were some jurors that were in love with the project. There were other jurors that were questioning what exactly am I doing. And I think the questions that challenged the project really created a point where I asked myself, does this project stop here, or is this kind of the starting point for what I'm really interested in as an architect in the future? So I think the importance of having a jury that wasn't just being congratulatory or, understanding that this is the end of an era, and having jurors that really question the depth of the project and question what my intention was as a designer. Really made me realize that this is more the beginning.
Very good.
I guess I'll speak to the process a little bit. It was really important in my project, and I think pretty apparent in the way that I work. And a lot of the work on the wall was created, months ago, not near the end, and a lot of the ideas seem to be born somewhat early, disappeared, and then returned. So, in that regard, I guess, I think there were a lot of unforeseen things throughout the project. There happened to be, consequences of the process. So, went about things in a certain, rigid way, and then in doing so, other things developed and evolved, and I would never pick it. I started out with a very, very clear idea of what it is I wanted to do, and that is nothing at all on the wall. So I think that a good process for me just in sticking to kind of a very regimented way of working was extremely helpful.
One thing I took out of the presentations and the juries was the question of where is it beginning, where is it in this project, and something that Eric had brought up is what is right, what is wrong, how do you know it's right? I had to come to that decision and say this is my interpretation of what I've already created, but in that way, leaving it open, I saw it as comparable to having a toy set when as I remember that, playing with my Leigh set, for example, and how that affected me as a child, and therefore as an architect now, I think I can attribute that to a lot how I played with what I had during the time. Disregarding for the time being my undergrad education, all the opinions that's come forth with this kind of architect and this kind of architecture that comes out of that kind of architect. This was my way of playing again and saying, and the narrative that came out, the animation and the renderings thereof were a byproduct of just my imagination and overflow. And I had to decide at that moment that this is what I'm going to show, this is what I see my dream world as. And it did leave it open to a lot of interpretation, which was, like the toy set, I think is important to leave it as such. Then it's almost as a play.
I think Jai and Naureen summed it up quite nicely for me. I should just pass the mic right now instead. But just the idea of seeing this, once the jurors began to talk about it, a lot of discussion came up that I really didn't even foresee coming up, as this is more of a beginning point. And as far as what Jai was just speaking about, kind of being buried deep in your own imagination, and how, in a sense, your alternate world eventually has to come to surface when you start to realize this is actually coming up. And really how far your head can be deeply buried, and what happens when that resurgence happens. So they probably put it better than I could put it.
I want to go back to the whole generational aspect that I brought up. And sorry, I just slightly looked at the question, but I have to get back to it because I feel like an asshole. But when you brought up war and you said, you know, a veteran coming back from Iraq, well, he's fighting a completely different war than someone from World War II. And I would
I'm not sure he knows that.
I think it's very obvious now. We're not
In
against it.
retrospect,
Maybe in retrospect.
there's actually a saying that the next war is always fought on the basis of the last one, which means generals are frequently wrong, which is not hard to prove. That was the point.
Well, essentially, it's a new war. That's what I'm trying to find, trying to clarify.
So thank you very much for coming. Is anybody in the audience, an advisor, faculty, student, interested in making a comment or asking a question? Please fire away.
I just would love to sort of listen to everybody and sort of kind of an ending to this, say either what you think architecture is or what you think the architect is, because we're seeing your work and it's the future of what we're all doing, so I think it'd be fun to hear.
Anybody want to take a grab?
When studying the software itself, questioning the straight line and the curve that also just opens up a whole new world of forms and us as formalists coming out of SCI-Arc and Maya itself. Like that alone is infinite possibilities. And I just think embracing the organic process and instead of the mechanical so much will lead us to fairy tale, another dream that then becomes reality again until somebody else dreams up a new world. But I think Maya's at the forefront of it, really. I can't leave this discussion without mentioning the software itself, because without working in that, those characters that I created would have been completely different. It would have been, the next person would have created something different, and it just, I think, starts from the straight line versus the curved line.
something new or a new take on something old or a new viewpoint. So it's not a certain geometry, it's not a certain style, it's just a new conversation. So, I mean, you'd be surprised to know that I model everything in Maya, which is totally ridiculous, but I like the interface. So,
Just to follow up on that, there are certainly times in the history of architecture where there are antipathies or adversaries in the sense that one feels, I think you could hear it in the panel the other night, not the one on Monday, but the one on Wednesday, that you feel you carry something or represent something against an opposition or an adversary. So the question really has more to do with what will you kill for, or who will you kill, in a way. In other words, what are you prepared to argue for? I have to do this, or I resign.
right, I mean,
You know what I mean? As opposed to just an argument for dexterity. Because Patrick's argument, in a way, was for something he called differentiation, which was, in his view, the ultimate dexterity. Curved lines.
right, I mean, I think, my opinion is also there's a way in which each of us works, and there's something that's born out of that, and I think my projects are all heavily structured in the way that my mind works, the way how the process of constructing, and it's born from that.
Anybody else like to comment?
I know I'm a 1A this year, and I know for me a big deal is how the school I go to structures my viewpoint and what I see architecture as. Go back to, I don't know, whenever you started, if you were a graduate here, first year, or whatever, undergrad, would you imagine that this is what you guys would end up with?
No.
I took conservative school in undergrad, so it was all rectilinear, square edges. It was in the Beaux-Arts line of thought. So this is the complete antithesis of that, and that's why I came to SCI-Arc. And to like better round out my view on architecture. And I think it did a good job doing that for me.
So it's a good no, rather than under a portrait now. It's a portrait here, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it is a good question from a young architect's point of view, which is, how do you go from here to there? Or were you aware of that? Or are you aware now where you started and where you landed? Which is also temporary. I mean, these are people who are just warming up, obviously. Anybody else? Okay, thanks a lot. We'll do it again next year.